right. Are we recording? Okay, great. So we are back with series two of Healthcare Strategy to Execution. This is a three-part series, our guest speaker series on stakeholder management and all the basics and foundations of it. This series is specifically designed for students and early careerists in the healthcare leadership space. And we really want to make sure that we're bringing practical strategies that everyone's able to implement relatively soon. And so we will touch on some theory, but we're going to be spending a ton of time here on tools, techniques, and strategies that you are going to be able to implement in any work groups that you're meeting, any stakeholder management groups that you're having to lead. And so we're very, very excited to be bringing this content to you all today. So, if you are finding that in your stakeholder groups, in your work groups, at work, your ideas aren't necessarily landing with the group, you're finding that people aren't buying in, that projects are getting delayed or stalled, that is really what this training and what this series is focused on today is how to address that, how to get buy-in, how to address when buy-in is failing, and how to really fix some of these core issues. And so if you're leading alongside clinical teams too, we're going to touch on that as well. There's some really common experiences that a lot of people in the healthcare leadership space across the board can really resonate with. And we wanted to bring these real on the ground experiences to you all as you are either starting out your career, getting ready to get started. And that is really what the focus of today's session is going to be. So by the end of the session, you'll have 5 concrete techniques and strategies that you can use in your everyday work. And we are really excited to go ahead and get started. So we'll start with some quick intros. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Maureen Dorsey. I am a healthcare operations strategist with over a decade of experience across hospital systems, innovation centers, and health tech startups. I specialize in stakeholder management, change implementation, and workflow optimization. And I've done a lot of this work across multiple healthcare markets with various clinic series and sessions. So our quote of the day today will be intentional about the stakeholder groups you lead. It will make all the difference with your group's outcomes. And so wanted you to keep that at the forefront of your minds today as we are going to be running through all the different things that could kind of happen as you are getting ready to lead a stakeholder group, or if you're leading one already. These are just some really great tips and tools that you can start to do. And so I'll go ahead and go into our next slide here. This slide just covers quick summary of all of the different techniques that we're going to cover today. And then we have a nice little bonus resource that we're going to share at the end. All right, so let's get us started. You're going to want to ensure that you are observing before you act. So most people walk in ready to talk. They walk in ready to present. They are ready to prove they belong. That is not a bad thing. And truthfully, if you are in anything healthcare leadership, you probably have that can do, will do attitude. And so it's a natural instinct to want to come in with your ideas, come in with your education, come in with your past work experience. But the thing that I want to point out here is that there are some flaws to just wanting to just hit the ground running in that way. Some of the problems that can really arise there when you are often going to be acting on assumptions before you have understood what is actually in front of you. And so from an organizational psychology standpoint, this term is actually coined by Carl Weck, and the term there is coined sense making trap. And this is when your brain tries to make sense of a new room too fast. And so you will literally pattern match to something familiar and start acting before you have actually seen the room clearly. So if you walk all in already, knowing what you think is happening, you will only see what confirms that and miss everything else. And so the discipline here is to slow your sense making down long enough to actually see the room before you respond to it. So, what are some indicators that you can kind of do to actually slow down your sense making? You're going to want to make sure that you're paying attention to who is speaking first. This will often point to your informal leader. You'll want to look at who looks to whom before responding, who is making eye contact. Those are things that you want to look for. That'll show you the real power dynamic. Then you'll want to look at who goes quiet when certain topics come up. That's often where you'll find where the tension lives. And so, another example here is you'll want to ask, like, when you ask your first set of questions, you want to see who's more engaged, who is responding more from a skeptical standpoint. Those will just give you really important information and pointers on things that will be really helpful for you later down the line. One last but certainly not least, you want to really pick up on who is kind of like disengaged from these topics that you're bringing up here, and that'll again just show you maybe maybe this person either is not the decision maker here, they're just someone who needs to be informed and they don't need to be deep in the details. These are things that you definitely just want to pay attention to that can often again help you as you are entering these rooms. So, the most important insight that I really want to make sure is clear here with this concept is that people reveal their priorities not through their agreement, but through what they notice and react to. And so, agreement is actually probably the least informative signal in a room. So, the things that you really do actually want to watch for is when you're asking your first set of questions that reveals who is what people are really thinking about. So let's say you start your stakeholder meeting and you're bringing up some topics. You want to listen, really pay attention to the first set of questions that you get asked, as well as when you ask a question, what is kind of like top of mind for your stakeholders. um, Another thing you want to keep in mind here is you really want to keep in mind here what makes someone interrupt you. What is it that'll often point to a priority or a fear or both. That is very useful information. You also want to pay attention to what makes someone go quiet. Maybe something landed and they are processing. That could be something that you definitely want to pay attention to or make note of. Another question you can keep in mind as you're running your meetings and leading a work group is what is something that someone is repeating. So if they come back to maybe a point you made earlier in your meeting and they want to circle back to it or they want to repeat it back to you twice, it could either be a point of contention, something that they're concerned about, or it could be a point for you of something that we need to make much more digestible for the stakeholder group. So all things that you want to start uh, paying attention to. All right. So, what is a major? I just want to summarize all of this and just say our key takeaways here. So, if you have the luxury of time, you're able to kind of just jump in and kick off some one-on-ones, meet people. That will be great to do in a one-on-one setting. But if you are having to kind of like really just get the group together and hit the ground running, you really want to try to advocate for yourself, to really make sure that you have an opportunity to set up some current state conversations. And this will really help to really level set your knowledge of what's actually happening on the ground. I say this because I say if you have the luxury of time because it does take time. However, in my next few slides where I talk about some real world examples, these are really areas where you can really advocate for yourself as a leader, to your manager, that you really need this time to understand current state, lay the ground, and really understand where the team is, so that you can make really meaningful suggestions, feedback, and really work towards building upon that leadership. All right. But all in all, your goal in these early stages, whether you are presenting a new idea for the first time or you are just running a current state meeting where you're just collecting information about what's currently happening, your goal remains the same. You're collecting reactions. You're not only, of course, wanting to understand the actual content of the work, but you really want to take some time to take note of the interworkings of your work group, collecting reactions, understanding decisions, paying attention to the first set of questions that people ask about where they react, where they don't react. This is just as important as the content of what they're sharing about their work as well. And that's really where we wanted to create this whole kind of concept of reading the room before you ever actually are able to move it. Before you influence it, you need to know what are the inner workings of that work group. All right, moving on to technique number two, find the informal leader. All right, moving on to technique number two, find the informal leader. So, previously mentioned, often people as stakeholder leaders, work group leaders, project leaders, you'll walk into those actual meetings, and we spoke about that sense making trap. The concept that we want to talk about here is taking kind of like moving away from just focusing on your org chart. So, most people walk into a stakeholder group, the first thing they'll do is they'll actually look at an org chart. I'm not saying don't look at an org chart. You want to have a good general sense of what is the hierarchy. The point we're trying to make here is that we don't want to only focus on your org chart. That it's important to know the org chart, but you also want to know who is actually going to be influencing the ideas outside of that org chart. So it just this is just something to call out here is that positions often give you your compliance. The compliance of the stakeholder group is often reliant on that hierarchy on that org chart. But who actually influences the group and influences decisions, that's sometimes not just easily accessible through an org chart. And that is where we really want to focus on finding this technique of finding that informal leader in the group. Um, and there's often a saying here that people do what you say because they have to, not because you have shaped their thinking. And so, in almost every room, there's someone who does not have the biggest title, but they're likely someone who everybody does listen to. And so, this is what we're kind of like titling our informal leader. And it's not supposed to be some big secret where you have to like go down some like long like journey of trying to like uncover the truth. It'll be pretty evident to you as you are meeting folks and talking to team members. But here's just some ways that you can go about helping yourself to kind of identify that informal leader. So, an informal leader is someone who inspires and guides and motivates through truth, expertise, and personal credibility. And they typically don't have that, formal authority like your VP or director. Again, not saying that that can't be them, but that's just something that I've experienced in my own experience as well as others and my colleagues. But the thing to call out here is that if you are able to connect with that informal leader and really make sure that you understand the things that are important to them, understand their ways of working. I think that'll again just really help you as a stakeholder leader to bring forth ideas alongside that your informal leader to really help get the overall work group moving towards decisions and moving towards project completion. So I'm going to focus on some indicators, what you actually watch for when you're, looking for, trying to identify, and just trying to pay attention to who is that informal leader. And there could be multiple in a group. So Things that you can watch out for is, who do people look to before they actually respond to something you said. You want to also look to who is speaking, who might be causing the energy of the room to shift. Again, a lot of these feel like high in the sky ideas, but it's something that you can naturally instinctively feel. You definitely want to pay attention to who is often challenging some of your ideas, and who's very confident in, and that doesn't mean aggressively or uncomfortably challenging your ideas, but who might be asking a lot of questions about new ideas. Like, that could be an indicator too. um, who gets referenced by others. Things like, well, Sarah mentioned like last week that, X, Y, and Z, things like that. That will really be able to help you see, when team members and peers are citing that informal leader. It's really showing the authority of that person within the group. So, some takeaways here. Before your things that you can literally, execute tomorrow. So, before your next stakeholder meeting, I want you to watch for the person who the room really defers to. And then the next thing I'd say there is, get a one-on-one with that person before that your next group meeting. Ask their opinion early. Reference their input in those group meetings. Make them feel heard. You definitely want to understand their perspective, understand, sometimes you don't get that nitty gritty, current state from high level executives. These are the people who are going to really know what's going on the ground oftentimes. Um, and just be high level. I don't mind these very, I don't even know what straightforward pictures here, in this slide. It was really just for us to over exaggerate some nonverbal cues that you probably want to pay attention to as you're leading meetings. Things like, crossed arms, people glancing at other colleagues. These are things that you just want to be aware of. Like, maybe like someone is really busy, and if you're going to eventually need them for decision making, that's something that you might want to just make note of, so that when it comes time to, you have an important meeting and you're going to need somebody, to be very active in that meeting, and they're typically typing away. These are things you want to try to address and get ahead of. um, all these things are super important. Again, you want to, just keep those things in mind and just make note of it. Make note of it. It's data that you could eventually use as you are getting to know your stakeholder groups longer. All right. So now that you know what to kind of like watch for, here's what you actually do with that information. So, I often say, when you are joining and this has happened to me. So, when you are joining a stakeholder group or any work group, and let's say you've like asked a question, or you're getting things kicked off, and you're immediately coming across silence, the first thing you'll really want to do is let it linger first. So, research shows that it takes only 4 seconds before silence becomes uncomfortable in conversations. And so, you really want to try and resist and let the silence breathe, especially in virtual environments. Someone will eventually come off mute. And so that was something that I was definitely experiencing in my coachings. As I was coaching other leaders, I was like, I realized that you're really quick to ask the question and then just start like kind of like speaking immediately. Let there be silence. Let the silence sit. It may feel a little bit awkward, but it's definitely going to be worth it, because someone's eventually going to come off mute. Now, if the silence continues, which that can definitely happen, you'll want to use some prompting questions. Things like, any initial reactions, anything we like, anything we don't like. Give people permission to be honest. That kind of like warms up the room and really disarms people. Other examples of ways that you can kind of like prompt, through silence, is, you might want to ask, like, do we think this could work? It invites opinion, not just agreement. Things like, keep adding prompts gently, and you are essentially unjamming the pipe, and not forcing any answer, for the group. All right. So the third thing you kind of want to do if you're kind of like starting off and you're hearing a lot of silence is you want to prompt some questions that do not that you want to prompt some questions and allow for potentially a round robin. This will really help to make sure that you kind of like avoid the like choosing a volunteer. Maybe you might want to go first yourself as like an example so people understand what you're asking of. But let's say you're asking a group for an opinion about something. Like, what do we think about this new clinical workflow? I'll go ahead and start. I'm new here. I just came in. I think from the outside looking in, it seems like there's a lot of different feelings about this workflow. I'd love to hear from the next person. Once you start to do a round robin and everyone has to go, you could get really lucky and you could get a lot of information that way. So that's just another way to get the room going and to kind of like overcome that silence. So, all this to say, silence is not your enemy, it is your signal. There are three tools now in your pocket, three different ways you can kind of get the room going. You want to, again, let it linger, do some prompting with some open questions, and then you want to offer a round robin. And so, the person who gets uncomfortable with silence, I know this could definitely be a challenge for you, but it's definitely something that you want to do as you're working through this end to end. I wanted to call out here is working on building your credibility quickly when first joining as a leader of stakeholders. And I wanted to share some key strategies on how to do that. So, wanted to call out this is definitely a underrated tool and technique that people kind of like leave on the wayside. And I think that is warmth opens doors. You definitely want to start with genuine engagement. Competence walks through it, but you show expertise in your relevant areas. You really want to make sure that you have a genuine interest on the day to day of your stakeholders, their common challenges, the things that they're going through. Know your audience, familiarize yourself with their daily challenges. As I mentioned, you want to reference their prior conversations, so by then you would have already had your one-on-ones. You want to show people that you've been communicating and touching and pumping heads with the people who are actually doing the work. And so often here you want to acknowledge past interactions and really build rapport here. Another thing you want to do is really be able to show vulnerability. Be open about your own learning process. If you just learned what a new workflow was the other day, you probably want to mention that, like, not the expert here, just learn this. I think people respect that much more than you kind of trying to like muddle your way through that those type of situations. Also, by understanding the dynamics of the team, you can really create a foundation of trust, and that is really built from, again, like I mentioned, genuine interest, genuine engagement, knowing your audience, referencing some prior conversations, making sure you're having those conversations, and showing vulnerability. So, going to go ahead and keep us moving along here that we're calling out here is to get to know people on an individual basis. So some things that I list out here, you might say like, I've worked with a clinician who actually wanted the exact opposite. That is totally fine, but these are just kind of like standard things things that you can kind of like start at, like a starting point that you can start at when building relationships with clinical based stakeholders. And so here's what I've learned. Here's what I've been surveying across the rooms of clinical teams that I've worked across and some of my colleagues. And so, what do you actually want from non clinical leaders in your rooms? This is what I went ahead and asked and surveyed across the board. And number one thing that I heard was being able to speak the clinical language and understand it. So this is a call out to non-clinical folks and stakeholder leaders. to get smart about the clinical world that you're operating in. If you're working in oncology, make sure you get familiar with the clinical jargon. If you're working in women's health, make sure that you get very familiar with some of the clinical jargon that you're going to be hearing across the board. So, know the protocols, know the jargon, know the general patient journey, know where your lane is, and know where their lane is. That's definitely something that was called out in those surveys that I was sending out, as well as something that I personally experienced myself. It's so important to know where the clinical line is and where the operational line is. And that will just help you to make better operational decisions, and it will help you to avoid blurring those lines. Again, the thing is, when first coming into organizations as a stakeholder leader, you might not know what the line is. And this is where humility and vulnerability comes forth the most. And this is where I would just call out, say, hey, I don't know if this is an operational decision. I'm not sure if this is a clinical decision. Bringing that forth and forward to clinical stakeholders, I think, is much more respected than just going ahead and making operational decisions and finding later on the back end that that was actually a clinical decision. So that's one thing to call out there. The second thing to call out here is understanding your clinical stakeholders day to day. What is actually blocking them? You might have a project that is mandated by leadership, it's coming from the company leaders, but the clinical stakeholders may not even be able to intake that and start to actually put forth effort towards that project if there are other really difficult things that they're trying to get over or work through. And so it's extremely important to be aware of their day to day, understand what's important to them, understand what's important to their teams. That will definitely, again, set you apart as a stakeholder manager and leader. The third thing I heard was using less words. Keep it clear, keep it brief. I always say, if I can't explain it in 10 minutes, I need to go back to the drawing board and make sure that I'm able to distill the high level project, the issue, the change, whatever the content of that stakeholder meeting is or that stakeholder touch point is going to be about. I need to be able to distill that in a very brief format. So things like starting off with basic questions of where are we now, where are we going, and how do we get there. That could just be a really good starting point for how to communicate to your clinicians. Oftentimes, thinking about all that they're managing, they're thinking about their patients, and there's just a lot going on their plate. And so I think, again, the best way that we as stakeholders can make communication as clear and brief as possible, that is definitely a plus. And the last thing that I'll call out here is know your clinicians. This is something that came out in the survey. As I mentioned, some people really like a deep in the details, in the weeds briefing on whatever you're trying to bring forth to the stakeholder group. Other clinicians are like, give me the headlines. I got to get back to my patients. So this is where I'm going to say, know your clinicians. They are not all the same. These are general rule of thumbs. Again, some people might have different working styles, and it's really up to you as a stakeholder leader to take the time to get to know your clinical leaders on your within your work group and really understand what how they work best and what they prefer in terms of working alongside each other in partnership. So now I know what you're thinking, because this definitely crossed my mind as I was like putting this together and thinking about what I've done in the past. Is like, am I just kind of like the water boy for the clinicians? I'm just like bending backwards to like kind of like make another person's experience as smooth as possible. And this is where the mindset shift really happens. This also came up in a meeting that I was where I was coaching and mentoring someone with a specific situation that they had. And this is where I pointed out to them. I said, it's really important that you kind of like shift your mindset of like we're not like bending backwards to try and like make somebody's life easier. What you're really trying to do at the end of the day is this will all be important stuff that is going to feed into your output and your outcomes and ultimately patient outcomes. And so this is where you really want to think about, when I know what makes my clinician's day go smoother, when I understand their constraints, when I understand what's taking up their time, when I understand the things that they are most likely to positively react to versus negatively react to, all of that information gathering is actually going to make your life easier as well. So it's just a call out here that when you take the time to get to know your clinicians, you're genuine about understanding their day to day, genuine about working on your communication, making things brief and clear. It's really going to shine through in your project outcomes, and especially in healthcare, any positive project outcomes ultimately help just, again, patients in general, help cost of care, improve quality of care, all of that stuff. And this a lot of those outcomes really are, I'd say, based in the foundation of how you'd pull your work group together to execute that I've shared with you today. So, back when I was joining an organization, one of my first few projects was I was brought on to a program where we were actually building out a transitions of care program. We had to roll that out across a healthcare tech company. And today, for purposes of keeping the organization, privacy's rights, we're going to call it Lincoln Health. There were 5 markets and we had an aggressive timeline. We had about 6 months to get all of them live. So the program touched nearly everyone at the organization. That's your nurses, your behavioral health staff, your care team leaders. It was a big change. And so here's the thing: the product team had already done all the heavy lifting. The design team had their meetings, workshops with the clinical teams, and they went ahead and built a program with the frontline team, from my understanding. So I had joined, my job was to join in, come in, take what the product team, the design team, everybody above me who had done that work. I was tasked with taking that finished product and making sure that it got across, essentially implement this new transitions of care program across those 6 different states and programming. So I thought I was walking into kind of like an already brought in room. That was kind of what the project was explained to me to be. And later on, again, after doing some digging and joining myself, I learned that that wasn't necessarily the case. And so I walked to the first stakeholder meeting. The product team was there. We had our clinical supervisors there, our frontline staff there, our super users who were directly providing the care to patients. And I was ready to start talking about training schedules and go live dates. And what I had got instead was, actually, we got a lot of pushback during that meeting. We had a lot of people kind of come off mute and share a bit of dissatisfaction with the tooling that was created after they've had some time to get into the system and click with the new workflow systems. They found that it was actually harder to complete their work, and that they didn't think that their team members were going to adopt this new process. And so there was a lot of pushback. And so while my original plan and my whole spiel for my intro meeting was to like say, all right, we're so excited. We're going to be scheduling these trainings. We're going to be prepping for a full on implementation. It was clear to me that there was a lot of work that we had to actually go back and do to prioritize the actual product build and the product design of this work. So instead of kind of backtracking there, I went ahead and full steam going forth with leadership's expectations of getting those trainings and implementations of that new workflow for that current first state launch. I went ahead and pushed through, and there was a lot of challenges. There wasn't buy-in. We didn't have a great design. There was a lot of pushback along the way. And so it really hit me that was the kind of like the realization for me. So point number 3 is like trust is not transferable, it must be earned. So when I walked into this project itself, I was told that all of this collaboration had happened, and we were good to go. And I was trying to just kind of like build off of that instead of going in and actually building those relationships myself. And so for the second market, I changed everything from those learnings. I didn't come into implement. I got involved in the product design process super early. I set up my one-on-ones with staff members. I was able to build credibility fast by taking feedback from those meetings, bringing it directly to product and design team so that they were able to make iterations and take that back to the frontline team. That was a huge game changer, being that person to be able to close the loop for those frontline team members. I was during those sessions, I was very, very tentative to moments where there was silence, moments where I felt like people were not really excited about, or they thought there were some issues, some structural issues with the design, and some people opted to silence. And so it wasn't until I did some of those probing questions live during those meetings that I really got to kind of create the safe space for people to understand that these meetings are set up for us to really do a deep dive into the product, do a deep dive into the workflow so that we could get it right. And so again, outcomes here that really shifted, I think, the kind of the mood of that project. And I had some major takeaways that I took from that second market and was able to carry that out to the rest of the markets. And so understanding the real situation, real interactions amongst your group. 2, you're finding your informal leader, and you're partnering with them so that you can really gain the right influence within the room. 3, you're going to be reading what's not being said, paying attention to your nonverbal cues. Not everything is going to be said verbally, so it's just very helpful to pay attention to those, pay attention to patterns to just again help you along the way. 4, we have build credibility fast, deliver small wins, keep your promises, and again, gather from your wins, gather from your losses, and just set yourself up to be doing better the next time. So, all of this content, I know it was definitely a lot, but wanted to just make sure that we created a very short, concise checklist of things that you can do to just quickly read while you're like prepping for your meetings. We wanted something easy. Again, we all know people are here who are either working, you're in busy, fast-paced environments. You need to be able to like you're not going to be able to just quickly pull up this video and pull up slide 5 or something like that. We wanted to put it in a one pager so that you're able to just quickly reference that and then go ahead and jump into your meeting prep. And so wanted to just make sure that we have that resource for you after this workshop today. And wanted to also, before we leave, plug for our third and final series of healthcare strategy to execution with the focus on stakeholder management. We will be focused our next session on building shared ownership when resistance shows up. That's definitely some of the questions that we got after session number 1. And so we want to create a dedicated session on that. And then we'll also provide, just like we did today, some great resources that you can use, as well as the recordings of all of these trainings. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for the engagement here today. And then we're going to hit pause as we go ahead and answer questions. Thanks, everyone.